Imagine you're just relaxing inside a tall apartment building. Then suddenly, the floor starts shaking a little. The lights begin swinging. A glass on the table slowly moves by itself. And within seconds, the entire building feels like it's dancing. For many countries, a moment like this could turn into a huge disaster. Buildings collapse. Roads crack apart. People panic and run outside. But in Japan, this kind of situation is almost part of everyday life. The country sits in one of the most active earthquake zones on Earth. Every single year, Japan experiences thousands of earthquakes. Some are tiny, some are massive, and strangely enough, many skyscrapers there still stay standing strong. Even during powerful earthquakes, they do not instantly fall apart like dominoes. So the big question is, how is that even possible? How can a country that constantly gets hit by earthquakes still build some of the safest cities in the world? What is their secret? Is it just because they use expensive materials? Or is there actually a completely different mindset behind it all? A mindset that makes Japan years ahead of many other countries. In this video, we're going to explore how Japan builds earthquake-proof buildings, from the disasters that changed the country's history, to the hidden technology underneath giant skyscrapers, and even the crazy experiments Japanese engineers perform, just to make sure millions of people stay safe. And the deeper you understand all this, the more you realize something important. Earthquake-proof buildings are not just about steel and concrete. They're about humans learning how to live with nature. Part 1. Why Japan gets so many earthquakes. If you look at Japan on a map, it just looks like a normal island country. But underneath the ocean floor, something terrifying is happening. Japan sits right on top of multiple tectonic plates. The Pacific Plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the North American Plate. Imagine 4 giant pieces of Earth's crust, constantly pushing and crashing into each other for millions of years. That's why Japan is almost never completely still. Small earthquakes happen nearly every day. Some are so tiny people don't even notice them. But sometimes, pressure builds up for years underground, and when it finally releases, the result can be devastating. One of the biggest turning points in Japanese history happened in the year 1923, when the Great Kanto earthquake destroyed Tokyo and Yokohama. Wooden buildings caught fire everywhere, roads collapsed, and more than 100,000 people lost their lives. That disaster completely changed the country. Japan realized something important. They could not stop earthquakes from happening, but they could learn how to survive them. Then, decades later, another major disaster hit the country. The Kobe earthquake in the year 1995. Thousands of buildings collapsed in a very short time. Bridges fell apart, train lines were destroyed, and the economic damage reached billions of dollars. Many Japanese engineers were shocked, because even some modern buildings failed to survive. But from that tragedy, Japan created even stricter building standards. And this is something really interesting about Japan. Almost every disaster becomes a national lesson. Instead of only blaming nature, people ask, what can we improve? What mistakes did we make? And how can we prevent this from happening again? That mindset helped Japan become one of the world leaders. In earthquake engineering, buildings in Japan are not designed just to look beautiful. They're designed to protect human lives. Every detail matters, from the foundation to the steel structure, even down to tiny bolts and joints. Everything is carefully planned for one main goal: to absorb as much earthquake energy as possible. Because in Japan, earthquakes are not a possibility, they're a certainty. Part 2. The secret foundations that let buildings move. When people think about strong buildings, they usually imagine something super solid and stiff. The harder the structure, the stronger it must be. Right. But Japan actually uses the opposite idea. Instead of making buildings completely rigid, they design buildings that can move with the earthquake. It sounds strange at first, but it makes perfect sense. Imagine holding a dry tree branch. If you force too much pressure onto it, it snaps immediately. But bamboo is different. Bamboo bends when pressure hits it, and because of that, it becomes much harder to break. Japanese engineers use the exact same philosophy. One of the most famous technologies is called base isolation. Underneath a building, engineers place giant rubber layers combined with steel and dampers. When an earthquake happens, the ground shakes violently, but the building above does not receive the full force directly. These layers work almost like a car suspension system. They absorb and reduce the earthquake energy, which means the shaking inside the building becomes much smaller. Some buildings in Japan actually look like they're slowly sliding during earthquakes, without suffering major damage. Japan also uses something called tuned mass dampers. These are giant heavy weights installed near the top of skyscrapers. Some weigh hundreds of tons. When the building sways one direction, the weight moves in the opposite direction, helping balance the motion. Kind of like someone trying to stay balanced on a moving boat. This technology is especially useful for tall buildings, because the taller the building gets, the stronger the swaying effect becomes during earthquakes. And here's the really fascinating part. Some Japanese engineers even study trees and the human body. To design better buildings, they realized nature has already spent millions of years adapting to pressure, so humans can learn from it too. Some buildings are designed almost like a human spine. Others use flexible joints similar to body joints. Instead of fighting against earthquakes, these buildings adapt to them. And maybe that's Japan's biggest strength. They do not try to control nature completely. They try to understand how nature works. Part 3. The crazy experiments Japanese engineers perform to build truly safe structures. Japan does not rely only on theories. They perform insane experiments. Some of them honestly look like scenes from disaster movies. Inside certain laboratories in Japan, there are giant machines called earthquake simulators. These machines can violently shake full-size buildings. Engineers build actual houses, mini apartment buildings, even rooms filled with furniture, and then they shake them almost to the point of destruction. The goal is not to destroy the building. The goal is to discover its weaknesses. Japanese engineers believe something very important. It's better for a building to fail inside a laboratory than fail in real life with people inside. One of the most famous facilities is called E-Defense, which is one of the largest earthquake testing facilities in the world. There, entire multi-story buildings are tested using simulations of real earthquakes, including some of the strongest earthquakes Japan has ever experienced. Engineers carefully study how steel bends, how walls crack, and how structures react under extreme stress. The data collected from these experiments becomes incredibly valuable, because every result helps improve future building regulations. In other words, Japan's building standards constantly evolve over time. They never assume their technology is already perfect. Besides physical testing, Japan also uses artificial intelligence and advanced computer simulations to predict how future earthquakes might affect cities. They calculate ground movement, soil conditions, structural stress, and possible damage in extreme detail, even before construction begins. A building can already be tested many times inside virtual simulations, and the attention to safety goes even further. Some Japanese companies create earthquake-resistant furniture, cabinets that lock automatically during shaking, and elevators that instantly stop at the nearest floor the moment earthquake sensors detect movement. So protection in Japan is not only about giant skyscrapers, it goes all the way down to small everyday objects, because during a disaster, even small details can save lives. And honestly, all of this comes from Japan's culture of preparation. They do not wait for disaster before taking action. They prepare for the worst long before it happens. Part 4. How Tokyo survives massive earthquakes. Tokyo is one of the biggest cities on Earth. Tens of millions of people live there. The city is packed with skyscrapers, busy train systems, and extremely dense infrastructure. So if a huge earthquake hit Tokyo, you would expect total chaos. But surprisingly, Tokyo has survived many major earthquakes. One major reason is Japan's extremely strict building regulations. Every structure in Japan must pass high safety standards, from tiny homes to giant office towers. The government constantly updates construction laws, especially after major disasters happen, which means newer buildings are usually much safer than older ones. Tokyo also has one of the fastest earthquake warning systems in the world. Thousands of sensors are spread across the country. The moment an earthquake is detected, warnings instantly appear on phones, television broadcasts, train systems, and public facilities. Sometimes people get a few seconds of warning before strong shaking arrives. That might not sound like much time. But even a few seconds can save countless lives. Bullet trains can automatically slow down. Factories can stop dangerous machinery. And people can quickly protect themselves. What's even more impressive, Japanese citizens are trained for earthquakes from a very young age. School children regularly practice evacuation drills. Offices have emergency procedures. And many families keep disaster emergency bags at home. These bags usually contain water, food, medicine, flashlights, and emergency radios. This culture of preparedness makes Japan very different. They understand that technology alone is not enough. People also need to be mentally prepared. Because during disasters, panic can be just as dangerous as the earthquake itself. And maybe that's one of Japan's biggest lessons for the world. A strong city is not only built with strong buildings, it's also built with disciplined and prepared people. Part 5. The mistakes that cause buildings to collapse. When people see buildings collapse during earthquakes, they often assume the earthquake itself was simply too powerful. But the reality is usually more complicated. Many buildings collapse because of poor design, cheap materials, or weak safety regulations. In some countries, buildings are constructed without seriously considering earthquake risks. The foundations are weak, the steel structures are insufficient, and the connections between parts of the building are too rigid. So when the ground suddenly moves, the structure cannot handle the pressure, and it collapses within seconds. Japan learned many painful lessons from disasters like these. They realized the biggest enemy is not only nature, but also human negligence. That's why construction in Japan is incredibly detailed. Every material gets inspected carefully, every design is tested thoroughly, and every project must follow strict safety rules. If regulations are ignored, the consequences can be extremely serious. What makes Japan even smarter is that they never rely on only one solution. They combine multiple technologies together: flexible foundations, steel frames, shock absorbers, and safer interior designs. Everything works together like layers of defense. Think about a motorcycle helmet. A good helmet is not only hard on the outside, it also contains soft materials inside that absorb impact. Japanese earthquake-resistant buildings work the same way. Their strength comes from the entire system working together. Not just one powerful component. And perhaps the most important thing, Japan constantly learns from failure. After every major earthquake, engineers carefully study which buildings survived, which ones failed, and why they failed. That culture of constant evaluation is one of the biggest reasons Japan keeps improving year after year, instead of repeating the same mistakes forever. Part 6. What the world can learn from Japan. At the end of the day, Japan's earthquake-proof buildings are not only about engineering, they are really about adaptation. Japan understands they cannot stop earthquakes from happening, but they can reduce the damage. And honestly, that mindset can apply to many parts of life. Sometimes humans waste too much energy fighting reality, when the smarter solution is learning how to adapt. Japan proves that discipline, preparation, and the willingness to learn from mistakes can transform a disaster-prone country into one of the safest places in the world. And what makes this story even more powerful is the fact that these technologies were born from tragedy, from destroyed cities, from painful memories, and from thousands of lives lost in past disasters. But Japan did not stop at fear. They turned fear into innovation. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. Great progress often comes from difficult times. Today, when we see massive skyscrapers standing strong in Tokyo, we are actually looking at the result of decades of research, experiments, failures, and non-stop hard work, all for one simple purpose: protecting human lives. And the more we understand how Japan builds earthquake-proof buildings, the more we realize something important. The best technology is not always the fanciest technology. It's the technology that protects people when they need it most. If you enjoy content like this, click subscribe and like to support this channel. And share this video with friends who might enjoy insights like these.